Howdy folks, I'm the Comics Kid 2099, and you may not be able to tell, but I am actually wearing this same shirt that I wore in my Star Trek On the Way Home review. That's because I am filming this on the same day that I went to go see Star Trek. As of now, I actually haven't seen Star Trek yet, but by the time you see this video, that video will have been up for about 2 days. I am here to give you a top 5 list of the best Batman stories. Now, before you go anywhere, I am going to go ahead and tell you right now, The Dark Knight Returns, Year One, The Long Halloween, Arkham Asylum, The Killing Joke. Those books will not be on this list for a couple reasons. One, if you are interested enough to click on this video, you've probably already read those books. In fact, back even before I was a huge Batman fan, I had read most of those books. I just read them because everyone said these books are quintessential. You have to read them. They are, if you like comic books, you have to read them. So I did, and some of them I liked. A couple of them I don't really like anymore, but that's for another video entirely. The point is, this video is more going to be 5 Batman books that are really good that I don't think quite get the credit they deserve. I'm not saying that any of these books deserve to be in the top 5, so this video, the title is a little misleading, but I couldn't think of what else to call it. So this is not actually my top 5. This is just 5 Batman books that I think are really spectacular that I don't think nearly enough people know about or talk about. So I am just going to get right into it. But before I do, I need to tell you, I am really horrible at putting items in an ordered list. If you tell me, in order, from worst to best, what are the da-da-da-da-da, I really have trouble doing that. These books, I love them all for different reasons. I am not going to be able to say, and the best one out of this pile is... No, sorry, I can't do that. So I'm more or less just going to be starting from the top of this pile of books that I have off screen, and I will just go through them in order. So even though one of them is at number 5 and the other one will be at number 1, there's not really a specific order that I would put these. That would take me days to try and figure out. The first one we are going to talk about is Batman Turning Points, with this cover by Tim Sale. Tim Sale does not do the interior of this book. This book really surprised me. It is written by a couple of different people, Greg Rucka, Ed Brubaker, and Chuck Dixon. So this is a 5-issue miniseries, and there were 3 writers on it. Now usually that sounds like a recipe for disaster. If you have a single story and one person starts writing it and then somebody else finishes it before it's over, that usually doesn't work out too well. I can think of some very good examples where that has actually worked out very badly. For some reason, this worked out very well. It could be the premise of the book. Basically, the idea is this starts at the very beginning of Batman's career, and it just highlights Jim Gordon and Batman's relationship. So this is a 5-issue miniseries. The first issue is set maybe just a couple months after Year One. There's mentions of Brendan's squad that appeared in Year One, and as far as I know hasn't appeared in any other Batman story. Then there's an issue set shortly after Batman has taken on Dick Grayson as Robin. See, I don't even want to tell you which each issue is. I kind of just want to let you go in and read it. Basically, this is stunning. It's kind of just a sprawling look at Batman's career through the lens of Jim Gordon. And if you liked Batman Year One, which I've always said is much more of a Jim Gordon story than a Batman story, you'll probably like this, because Jim Gordon is actually a character here. And I feel like even in some really good Batman stories, Jim Gordon just... there's not a whole lot done with him, and it's probably because after Year One, there's not a whole lot more you can do with him other than just kind of have him there. This does not make that mistake. This is a really great story. It's very standalone. It references a whole bunch of events from Batman's timeline. You know, if you're very familiar with the Batman timeline before the New 52 kind of reset everything, it helps put some things in place. So if you're into that sort of thing, as I used to be when I read this, you'll like that. But if you've not read a whole lot of Batman, this is still a very good book to read. You just basically need to know, okay, there's this guy named Bane. Okay, Batman was replaced by a guy named Azrael. So yeah, that's a spoiler for one of the issues, but, you know, that happened 20 years ago. So yeah. So, Batman Turning Points, written by 3 different dudes, drawn by a couple of different dudes who I have not looked up. Read it. It's awesome. I don't hear nearly enough people talk about this one. Definitely needs to be higher up on everyone's top 25 list or whatever. The next one I am talking about is Batman Blind Justice. You can see here the introduction of Henri Ducard. My dad said that with a spelling like that, it would be pronounced Henri. I don't think in Batman Begins, I don't think they ever mentioned his first name. They just called him Ducard. So I'm guessing that it is Henri. I'm going to go ahead and trust my dad's instinct on that. This book is written by Sam Hamm, who wrote the initial script for the 1989 Batman movie with Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson. Now, if you're watching this, you're either a huge fan of that movie or you really don't like it. I am somewhere in the middle. I grew up really loving that movie. Since then, I've watched it, and each time I watch it, I find more and more that I really don't like about it. And part of that has to do with the fact that after watching Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, I'm kind of like, oh, that's what a good Batman movie is like. These movies kind of don't measure up. Now, I still think that all of those movies that predate Batman Begins, they each have something that they bring to the table. I'm even going to go so far as to say that Batman and Robin is not the steaming pile that everyone lets on. However, this is not about that. This is about Sam Hamm and Batman. He wrote a script for the 1989 Batman movie. He talks a little bit about that in the foreword for this book. Apparently, the script he wrote was not exactly the script that was basically used when they went into filming. He kind of sort of gets into it here, but he doesn't flat out say it. Apparently, he was not too incredibly happy with the 1989 Batman film. But at one point, Dennis O'Neil, who was the editor of the Batman books at the time, he apparently had taken a look at the original script that Sam Hamm wrote, and he said, that Sam Hamm guy, if he ever wanted to write a Batman comic book, I would let him. And then Sam Hamm was like, well, I'd love to, but I'm busy writing TV and stuff. Then comes the writer's strike that happened in the late 80s. I don't remember exactly what year it was, but there was a writer's strike somewhere around this time. And Sam Hamm was like, well, I can't write anything for TV or movies because there's a strike going on. So then he churns out this kind of dense, very thick book. It's, I think, 3 issues long, but one of the issues is like 70 pages. So it looks a lot thicker than what it sounds. And this book is just really good. I would have expected, if you told me that there's this screenwriter guy who wrote a Batman script for a movie and then was brought in to do a comic book story, I think this was written for Batman's 50th anniversary. I would have expected this to be kind of a clip show. It brings in just every villain under the sun. Basically what you got with A Long Halloween or Hush, where every villain that Batman has ever fought is featured in this big, extravagant 50th anniversary. That's not what Sam Hamm does here. This is its own very original story. This introduces Henri Ducard, who, if you've only seen Batman Begins and you know that name in conjunction with Ra's al Ghul, I will go ahead and tell you, Henri Ducard of the comics, he hasn't appeared in a whole lot of comics, but he is not connected with the League of Shadows or Ra's al Ghul. He is his own thing. I kind of like him. I wish he had appeared in more stories. This story kind of gets into Batman's past where he was trained a little bit, so in that regard, I guess it is similar to Batman Begins. It deals with Bruce Wayne and Gordon a little bit. At the beginning of the book, in the foreword, Sam Hamm talks about, does Commissioner Gordon know that Batman is Bruce Wayne? Well, according to Dennis O'Neil, who again was editing the Batman books at the time, in the present-day Batman books, Gordon does not know who Batman is. I take issue with that because if you've read Year One, at the very end of Year One, Bruce, without his costume, without a mask, without anything, he saves Jim Gordon's baby from falling to his death off a bridge. And then Jim Gordon, without his glasses, he says, thank you, you saved my son. Then there's kind of an awkward pause, and he says, you know, without my glasses, I'm basically blind. I can't really see who you are. Now, some people, apparently Denny O'Neil included, they look at that scene and they say, okay, so Gordon doesn't know who Batman is. Now, I kind of think that's a little bit bogus. I think that when Gordon sees Bruce Wayne saving his son, what he's actually saying is, you saved my son. I am not going to hunt you down. I am not going to use this information against you. As far as you're concerned, your secret is safe with me. I'm not going to use this information against you. That's how I've always interpreted it, and apparently Denny O'Neil doesn't quite see it that way. However, this story has a very interesting moment. I'm not really going to get into it because it's kind of a spoiler, and I want you guys to read this. Now, the story is not perfect. Maybe I just need to do a review on this someday where I can actually get into spoilers, but it's not perfect. There's something a little ridiculous that happens in this book. I'm not going to get into it. But as far as books that are definitely underrated, this one is very much one of them. I am very shocked that people don't talk about this more often than what they should. This is a very, very memorable Batman story. I love it quite a bit. The next Batman book I will be talking about is one that apparently, according to Tim Burton, this story was influential in the creation of the 1989 Batman movie. And this story is Strange Apparitions. I don't know if you can really see it because I've got it in a plastic bag. This book is very much out of print. If you try to find it, it's going to be very expensive. I paid almost $30 for it. That's probably the most I've ever paid for a graphic novel, especially one that was used. I'm not very happy that I paid that much, but the story is very worth it. This is Batman in the 1970s. Now, I've talked a little bit about Batman Year One and The Dark Knight Returns. And a lot of people, and when I say a lot of people, I mean the entire internet at large, when they talk about Batman, the way they tell the story is that Batman was Adam West. He was very goofy, very campy, very colorful, from basically creation all the way up to the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. And then the defining moment of awesome, when Frank Miller comes in, and over the span of 2 years, he does 2 Batman stories, The Dark Knight Returns and Year One. Now, to hear these people tell this story, Frank Miller is the guy responsible for Batman being dark, broody, gritty, whatever word you want to use to describe it. Everyone says that he's kind of the one who made Batman be what he is today. And certainly he is responsible for upping the ante. I don't think, however, that Batman went from being Adam West to being Frank Miller's Batman. I just don't quite see it that way. If you go back and you read something like Strange Apparitions, Batman is not Adam West. This is, I know this is going to sound silly, but you know, Adam West was the 60s, Frank Miller was the 80s, this is the 70s. This is the stepping stone between them. This feels like Frank Miller was reading this when he was a teenager and was like, yeah, that's almost what I think Batman should be. There is a couple of moments in here where it's like, wait a minute, that sounds a little bit like the 1960s television show. Actually, it's just 1 or 2 moments. Really, it's Batman is basically recognized as a public figure, and when someone gives him a summons, he's like, okay, yeah, I'll appear in court. And that sounds really ridiculous in a post-Year One, post-Dark Knight Returns kind of world where Batman is often labeled as an urban legend, or everyone knows he exists, but they're not going to go up and give him a summons to appear in court. So, yeah, that is a holdover from the 1960s. That's definitely something that probably did happen in the 1960s television show. I don't know. This story reinvents Batman. Everyone talks about how Year One and Dark Knight Returns really took Batman to the new levels of awesome. This book did it first, in conjunction with something that I will be talking about a little later in this video. This book takes a couple of characters who are, before this, they were kind of silly, and it kind of makes them a little bit more terrifying. There is one character in specific, if you haven't read this and you want to read it, I won't tell you who it is. It's a character who you are very familiar with now, but before this book, people just didn't know who this character was. It was an existing character, but it was a character who had only appeared maybe once or twice and didn't really look or resemble the character that appears here. I don't know what else to say. This book is very much something that you should read. If you are one of the people who thinks that Batman by Frank Miller is where it all started as far as dark comics go. You really need to read this. You really need to see, okay, it was going on, it was a slow progression. This was happening a decade before Frank Miller got a hold of Batman. The only reason that I am not ashamed of myself for paying $26, $27 for this is because it is so flaming good. This book, guys. This book. The next book I want to talk about. This one is a little bit of a cheat. It's part 1 in a 4-part story. But I just wanted to talk about this one real quick because it kind of starts the whole thing off. Bruce Wayne, Murderer. There are several different Batman events from the 90s on up until like the early 2000s. There was Nightfall, No Man's Land. There was the Bruce Wayne Murderer saga, which I will talk about. Then after that, there was War Games, which I really hated. And there's this one. Basically, the premise is Batman and one of his sidekicks, they're out patrolling. Nothing happens. It's a very quiet night. So then they come back to the Batcave, and Batman goes on up into Wayne Manor, and then his sidekick is one Sasha Bordeaux. As far as I know, I don't know very much about her. I think what happened was Lucius Fox hired this girl to be Bruce Wayne's bodyguard. And eventually, since she wasn't going to let Bruce Wayne out of her sight, she finds out that he's Batman. And so she kind of becomes a sidekick. I don't think she ever really had a code name, though. These two, they go up into the mansion, and Bruce Wayne's ex-girlfriend is there on the floor, dead. And Bruce Wayne is holding her body. He's got blood all over her hands. Now, the whole story is basically the Gotham PD. They've arrested Batman, they've arrested Sasha Bordeaux, and they're trying to figure out who murdered this girl. We know that it wasn't Batman, although it kind of toes the line. It's kind of trying to say, well, maybe Bruce Wayne murdered her before Sasha got up into the mansion. We don't know. But yeah, we're pretty sure that Batman didn't murder this girl. The question is, who did murder her? This is a really tense, really suspenseful book because the Gotham PD, we find out they don't really like Bruce Wayne. At least these two cops who we're seeing, Crispus Allen and Renee Montoya, they don't really like him that much. And Bruce Wayne can't say, listen, I have an alibi. I was out patrolling, because that would ruin his secret identity. So he basically has to say, listen, I didn't do it, but I can't tell you where I was when it was going on. And then you've got Batman's other sidekicks who have not been arrested. You've got Robin, Batgirl, Oracle, Nightwing. These guys are all trying to figure out who could have done this. How could this have happened? I don't want to spoil the end of this, but if I talk about the following books, it will definitely spoil it just if I mention the title. So if you are wanting to read this, if you don't want to be spoiled, I'll tell you what. I got my thumb up. As soon as I put my thumb down, you can go back to, you can turn the volume up or whatever. Turn the volume off right now. I'm going to spoil this book a little bit. If you have not read this, mute the video right now. When I put the thumb down, then you can unmute the video. Okay, go. At the end of this book, Bruce Wayne escapes from prison. He basically says, you know what? I don't care. I don't care if the world thinks that Bruce Wayne is a murderer. I'm just going to get rid of the Bruce Wayne persona. I am going to be Batman all the time. And I don't care. Now, that was simply amazing. I had no idea that was coming. This was really, really a creative way to deal with the idea that, does Batman really need his alternate ego? And then how does this affect the rest of his sidekicks? Because, as you know, in this book, while Bruce Wayne is sitting in jail, all of his sidekicks are trying to prove that he's innocent. And then he basically says, yeah, I don't care. Screw all of you guys. You just need to leave. I'm just going to be Batman all the time. I don't care that you did all this hard work trying to prove that I'm innocent. I'm just going to throw that away. And as far as everyone is concerned, Bruce Wayne is a murderer, and I just don't care. Now, this goes into 3 more volumes called Bruce Wayne Fugitive. Now, one of the volumes, either 2, I think it's volume 2, is kind of just all the sidekicks. It's barely Batman at all. And then one of the books is all Batman, and it's barely any of the sidekicks. So I think it was one of those things where, like, volumes 2 and 3 kind of sort of happen at the same time, but you can sort of read them all in numerical order, and it works just fine. So yeah, spoilers are done. read this book, and then after you're done reading this book, go and read the other 3 books, which I talked about in the spoilers a little bit just then. You will not be disappointed. This is I may be overstepping myself a little bit. This may be one of the best Batman event crossovers that I've ever read. I like it better than Nightfall. I like it a little bit better than No Man's Land, which I've only read about half of. Very, very solid stuff. Read it, you will not be disappointed. So, what is the final book that I will be talking about? That would be Batman, Tales of the Demon. Now, this one was hard. The last spot was really hard to fill. The other 4 were pretty easy. When I was thinking about doing this video, they all came to me pretty quickly. I was like, yeah, I'll do that one, that one, that one, that one. This one was really hard to think of. The big problem with this is that it is not a story. This is called Tales of the Demon. This collects, I want to say it's like 10 years of Batman stories. Yeah, it's not really, these aren't dated, unfortunately. The first story here is from 1969, and I think this goes all the way up to 1979. I could be very wrong. This might not take the place over that many years. All of these stories are written by Dennis O'Neil. Dennis O'Neil, I've mentioned already, he was the editor of the Batman books in the 80s, early 90s. He was also writing the Batman books in the 1960s, and wow, he was really writing those books. This is the introduction of Ra's al Ghul. The first several stories in this book don't actually feature Ra's. You've just kind of got Batman slowly becoming aware of this very vast worldwide organization. He slowly gets pulled into this world, if you will. There's really not much more to say about this. I basically picked this, even though this is not a cohesive story like all the others that I picked are, this is still, at the end of the day, this is better than all the other books that I thought about using for this final slot. Very, very solid stuff. Again, I mentioned earlier that Strange Apparitions was the precursor to Frank Miller making Batman dark. This book does that even before Strange Apparitions. This started in 1969. This does not feel like a campy 1960s Batman. This feels like a very modern story in a lot of ways. Now, it doesn't look as dark and as shadowy as a comic book that you might pick up in 2013. It still reads in a very modern way, but it also has a very classic feel about it. I kind of, just the more I talk about this, the more I want to read it again. I've had that with all of these books. I really just want to do a full-blown video about each of them. Read this book. If you like Batman Begins, if you like Ra's al Ghul, I know he also appeared in the 1990s animated series. If you like that character, this is where it all starts. This is the character as far as I'm concerned. The movie does a really good job of giving us a version of the character, but it is not the character. There is a little bit there that I'm just like, that's not quite Ra's al Ghul. This is Ra's al Ghul as far as I'm concerned, and it is spectacular. This book is really, it just feels like a fish out of water. It does not feel like it belongs in the very early 1970s. This feels like it happened a full decade later, and that is not a slight against this book at all. It's not a slight against the books in the full decade later. This is just some really solid Batman stuff. So, that is my top 5 Batman books. What did you think of my list? Do you have your own list? I would love to see video responses from you guys. Or, since this is not something that would take very long to explain, you could just do a comment in the video. What are 5 Batman books that you think are underrated and that they should be talked about more than what they are? If I didn't mention yours, it's probably for one of 2 reasons. 1, I either haven't read it, or 2, I did read it and I didn't care for it enough to put it on this list. Those are the 2 reasons that I probably didn't cover the book that you're thinking of. So, that is today's video. I hope this video found you well. If it did, I hope you will like, share, comment, subscribe, do all those things that you love to do on YouTube videos. And I hope that you have a good rest of the day. I will talk to you tomorrow.